probably familiar with these terms, but we know that we might have other folks who are not yet seniors who are participating. So just a few vocabulary words we want to make sure everyone knows. The first is cost of attendance. You might see it abbreviated as COA. Cost of attendance is representative of the entire cost of attending 1 year of college. So that should include direct costs, things for which the college can bill you, such as tuition, room, board, fees, and if you choose to accept the college's health insurance plan, that as well. But there are also indirect costs that are associated with going to college, things like paying for books or your travel expenses just to get to and from campus between your home and the college campus, as well as personal expenses. I always refer to it with my students as the pizza and deodorant money. But those are indirect costs that are associated with going to college, and you have to take those things into consideration when you're thinking about what you're actually paying to go to school. The second term I want to go over is FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. Chances are, if you are a senior, your family has completed this form. It's what determines your family's ability to pay. It also determines your eligibility for federal funding. Some of the things that Yulia was talking about in terms of federal student loans or different types of grants, such as the Pell Grant. By completing and submitting the FAFSA, the Department of Education will run their calculations and will give you what's called an expected family contribution, or an EFC. That's the amount that the Department of Education thinks that your family is able to pay toward a year of college. And colleges will then use that EFC to help determine what your financial aid package will look like. There are about 200 undergraduate colleges and programs that might require a secondary form called the College Scholarship Search Profile, or the CSS, or the profile, or the CSS profile. It goes much more in depth, looking even further at your family's financial resources to help a college determine what other assets your family may have besides income or savings that could help pay for your college education. On the next slide, we have just a few more terms. Next, we have your demonstrated need. Your demonstrated need is determined by taking the cost of attending a college and subtracting your expected family contribution. The remaining amount is the need that you demonstrate, how much you're going to need to be able to afford to go to that institution. Colleges will review applications in two different ways. So you might hear the terms need blind and need aware. The difference between these two terms is that for a college that is need blind, they will make admissions decisions regardless of your family's ability to pay. So even if your family has no income, no assets, nothing at all to contribute towards your education, your inability to pay or contribute towards your education is not going to impact your admissions decision. A college that is need aware does take ability to pay into consideration, but it typically ends up being a very, very small percentage of a college's applicant pool where that ability to pay is really going to impact at all a student's outcome in the admissions process. There are a variety of different components that Yulia went over. I just want to talk a little bit more in depth about what makes up a financial aid package. So the first component or piece that you might see in a financial aid package would be scholarships, and typically they're merit scholarships. And so they're based on some type of achievement that you have or other desired qualities that you might bring to that campus. So it could be for a merit scholarship, could be for academic achievement. It could be because you're a talented clarinetist or you are a lacrosse player and are able to be awarded an athletic scholarship. Colleges have a variety of different types of merit scholarships, and your ability to pay or lack of ability to pay typically does not factor into the awarding of a merit scholarship to you. There are also grants that could be included in your financial aid package. Grants are typically need-based, so it does take into consideration your family's ability to pay for your college education, and so that's another component that you may find in a financial aid award package. Some colleges will also offer Workstudy as part of your financial aid package. And so they set aside money so that you have the opportunity to get a campus job once you're there and to earn that money to help pay for your educational expenses. The last part that you'll typically see awarded in a student's financial aid package are student loans. And student loans, as Yulia mentioned, could come from the federal government. They could come from the institution itself. There are a variety of different options, but unlike merit scholarships and grants, student loans do need to be repaid after you have graduated most often. Merit scholarships and grants don't provide it, or I'm sorry, not provided. Merit scholarships and grants don't need to be repaid, but there are typically strings attached. So with scholarships, you typically have to maintain some type of GPA or steady progress toward graduation to keep that scholarship. Grants, you typically are awarded those again year after year in college, assuming that your family continues to demonstrate the same level of need as the prior year.
So one of the panelists is saying that the slides are cutting off. Are we trying to figure that out?
For those of you who had the great joy of seeing all of my bookmarks earlier, yes, we are currently trying to figure it out. Zoom is not my forte. I have other skills. We'll work on it as everybody else keeps
I think
presenting.
you can unfull screen perhaps, and then just try to.
I can see all of my. Oopsie.
Oh yeah. And then maybe
that was not
just navigate to that appropriate slide, and you can hide your bookmarks if you want.
I'd really rather do a way to. Still cutting off?
Yeah, it's still cutting off.
We're just going to do this, and y'all are going to appreciate my bookmarks and not judge me for stealing my little sister's Hulu account.
Are we good?
Can you scroll down to the corresponding slide?
Like how to read, I think we're on.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Do you want me to try to screen share, Yulia?
I think she's saying yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to take myself out of this one. I know my skill set.
Is this working better?
That looks great.
Okay. I think you're set, Jamie.
So in terms of how to read a financial aid package, we tried to give you a lot of the terms prior to, but every college does this a little differently. That's the beauty of the financial aid world, and I'm saying that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, in that they may be confusing. And so if you're having trouble or difficulty reading those financial aid packages for those seniors who have received aid at this point, you are probably not alone. And there are lots of different tools out there on the web to try to compare different packages. But you really do want to look at what are the cost of attendance and then kind of subtract the things that you know that the financial aid is being given to you for that year. You want to figure out what are the costs that you are going to have to pay out of pocket in order to, as I often say to my students, get your butt in the seat. And it may be different depending upon whether or not you are choosing to live on campus or not. So some of those tuition fees, room and board may look different depending upon your home situation or living situation. But you want to make sure that you are reading every detail in the financial aid package and using whatever tools the college and university are offering to you to read those. If you are having difficulty, I'm not sure if to say this, like if you're having difficulty reading it and understanding it, you need to kind of phone a friend. I think that to me is the number one thing. If you have a counselor to reach out to, great. Otherwise, reach out to the financial aid office and the admission office. They should be able to walk you through that because it's school specific. I can tell you from experience that it is not, this is something that I continue to do. I will call a college and an institution. I've been doing this for almost 2 decades, and I will still call a financial aid office and make sure that I'm reading the financial aid letter properly with my students. And so there is no shame in that. They are the professionals doing that work. and this is something you are new to. So please don't hesitate to give them a call. Maybe we can kind of flip that to the next slide. If you haven't received your financial aid package, it's the same thing. Check your emails and portals. Make sure that you did not miss something in that email and weren't asked for a form or information that you needed to fill out. A lot of colleges will continue to ask for information and forms. One of those is called a verification process. Some of you may have been selected for them, and sometimes you can find out that you were selected to be verified or through verification with a little asterisk after you fill out your FAFSA. So you may have seen that. Other colleges will just ask you to be selected for verification. That is asking you to verify the numbers basically that you have entered, and they want to make sure. And in order to get your financial aid package, financial aid award, you need to be able to fill out those forms. Another, certain colleges will use what's called IDOC. So if you filled out the CSS profile, a lot of times they use a system called IDOCs where you can upload your parents' tax forms, your W-2s. Those are all the forms that are used through that verification. Sometimes the verification process is really just asking how many people are living in your home. Sometimes there are additional forms that you need. So you need to make sure that you're checking those emails and checking those portals. If you have not received your financial aid package, at this point, if you've received an acceptance from college, you should also have a financial aid award. If you don't, and you don't think that you have anything missing, you need to give a call to the financial aid offices. I would suggest that you actually call the financial aid office or email the financial aid office and the admission office. If there's been somebody that you've been in contact with from the beginning of this process, make them know that you don't have all the materials, and they can help navigate and point you in the right direction. You want to use those people who are trying to advocate for you on your behalf to help you as you kind of navigate this process. So ask the professionals, especially if there isn't a counselor or somebody on your end who can help you navigate that. But still, every institution does it differently, and that's where the challenge of this process really lies, is that it's kind of a maze for a lot of us. And so you want to ask the people who work at these institutions who know their specific maze to help you kind of get through it to the other end. At the heart of it, we all want to make sure, and I would think the institutions, they want kids who come to college. They want kids who can be successful at their institution. And so have them enter into your process and help you kind of navigate and finish that process fully. If we can keep going. We want to get to your questions, so make sure you are asking these questions if any of these things are applying to you. If your financial aid award does not seem to be what you need, specifically, especially right now in this year, if your parents have had job changes, if they've been unemployed, if they've been furloughed based on the pandemic, if you've impacted in any way, if you have information or new information, it never hurts to ask. And so you want to follow the institution-specific process for appeal. Oftentimes there's a letter that you'll have to write, and there's a new website that kind of has just been kind of publicized to counselors and others in higher ed, FormSwift, that kind of helps students with the appeal process, at least kind of examples of the appeal process. I always tell my students, you can't win if you don't play, right? It's like the lotto. If you don't ask somebody for more money, they can't give you more money. So the worst case scenario is that they say no. And I know that that's a bummer in itself, but you should always be able to ask that question. And a lot of times there are times that they missed information. And that you have it. I would also say it's not even just job changes, and I don't know if I put this, but if there are medical issues, if there's something that was not reflected in the information that you handed in December, that now in March, in April, have impacted whether or not your family can pay, then you need to make sure you're communicating that with the college. That is what the appeal process is, and that you want to make sure that you are calling or emailing. I would actually say that's the other thing. A lot of my students right now are saying, I'm trying to call people and they're not answering. Well, the reality is, just like you're home from school, everybody's home from work. And so a lot of these financial aid offices are working, and admission offices are working via email as opposed to phone. And so make sure that if you're trying on the phone, you're not getting an answer, make sure you're emailing too. Again, if this is something that you need, this is a time to advocate for yourself, as well as kind of getting some professionals to help you to get what you need so that you can be successful in college. I'm good.
And so we do recognize that things are going to potentially look a little bit differently this year than they normally have, especially with regards to the wait list. I will say on the admissions side of the house, we are definitely anticipating, it's still to be determined, but as an industry, we're anticipating some greater waitlist movement. So wanting to give a shout out to our students on the waitlist as well. For schools that meet full demonstrated needs, schools that say, whatever money you need, we will find it for you. There are 4,000 colleges, fewer than 100 are full need, so it's a small list, but for those schools, they should still meet your demonstrated financial need as per usual, regardless of if you're admitted early decision, regular decision, off of the wait list, wherever. For schools that don't meet full need, and that is the vast, vast majority of colleges in this country, for schools that don't meet full need, financial aid is still important. I will say, in what I've seen, merit aid, so those academic scholarships, can be a little bit tougher to find for students coming off of the wait list. Same thing for any need-based aid if the school is not full need, only because by that point in the year, by the point of May, June, July, August even, budgets become a reality. And so there's a little bit more, there's a little bit less to be given out. So if you are a student who is on the wait list and you are admitted, please make sure to still ask the question of, what does my financial aid look like, especially if the school is not need blind, because that means that the school might call you before they give you your acceptance and say, hey, Chris, we're so excited to admit you, baby. Do you think that you still need financial aid? And this is a question that's incredibly uncomfortable and feels gross, but comes to the fundamental truth that higher education is still a business in certain aspects. And so if you do still need financial aid, say that, because even if they admit you off of the wait list, if they're going to put you with the full cost of attendance and you can't make that happen, being admitted makes no difference for it. So be honest with the school, be honest with your own personal financial circumstances, how they're changing. Feel confident saying, yes, I do still need financial aid. I don't know how much, because you haven't given me a financial aid award yet, but I do still need it. And know that, especially for schools that are not full need, that financial aid package might end up looking a little bit different than it would potentially in regular decision. I know that is really wishy-washy, and that's because the process is kind of wishy-washy, especially when it comes to waitlist students. But luckily, we have saved so much time for questions, so please send your questions on through that Q&A feature. We are more than happy to kind of be of service to you in any way that we can.
Just to amplify what Yulia just said, it looks like you all are still working on formulating those questions with students and families. Wanted to emphasize that if you ask a question, it's not going to be like, so-and-so wants to know this. It's going to be totally open and anonymous. So please go ahead and ask. And I guess one thing, as we wait for our guests to formulate those questions, some great information has been shared about institutional financial aid, the kind of scholarships and aid that colleges offer. A lot of families also have been working hard on outside scholarships, those things operated by community organizations. I was wondering if, Chris, would you mind sharing a little bit about how a student can navigate outside scholarships?
Close the door.
In terms of outside scholarships, hopefully you have been working on applying for scholarships available in your local community. I always try to gear my students towards those that are offered in the DC metro area, simply because the applicant pool is going to be a lot smaller and a lot less competitive than everyone who's applying for instance, a Coca-Cola scholarship. So it's really important that you try to look for those resources. Every $250, $500, $1,000 scholarship counts, and it can make a pretty big impact, especially once those start accumulating. I sometimes have to remind my students that when they get to college, they actually have to pay for books, and they could easily spend several $100s in the semester, depending on their major, for books. So these small scholarships can really make a big difference. If you are the lucky recipient of a scholarship that is coming from your local church or synagogue or community organization or an alumni chapter for a sorority, it's really important that you follow up with your college to ask them how they're going to treat that outside scholarship. There are a lot of colleges that are like, great, congratulations, we're happy that you've won this scholarship. Now that you're bringing in this additional funding from the outside, if we've given you student loans, we're going to reduce your student loans by the amount that you're bringing in. But there are some colleges that will reduce the need-based grant or the merit scholarship that they have given you by the amount of the outside scholarship you're bringing in. So it's really important that if you are applying for and eventually are winning these outside scholarships, that you talk with your college about how they treat this additional funding that you're bringing in, so that you can maximize the financial aid types that you have.
Thank you, Chris. Some great questions have been flowing in, and it seems like some of them deal with sort of a timeline for applying for financial aid. For the benefit of those of our guests who are juniors or who are currently kind of going through their college search as seniors, would anyone feel comfortable sharing a sort of rough timeline as to when one can open the FAFSA and submit that, when one should start looking for outside scholarships and that sort of thing?
I can jump in. The FAFSA goes live, and my apologies for any background noise. I'm trying to get my kids to close the door while they're watching a show. The FAFSA goes live October 1st of the academic year that you're applying for college. So for those seniors, the FAFSA is currently live and has been live since October 1st. That said, you should be looking at the different institutions that you're applying to, because they will have specific deadlines specific to their institution. So I would just say that if you're a senior, it is not too late to fill out the FAFSA. You should still do that if you have not done so already. The same is true for the CSS profile. There are specific deadlines depending upon the institution. So you want to make sure that you are following those deadlines just like you would follow those deadlines for the application for admission. It is the same. Unfortunately, what I think is one of the most confusing parts of this process is that oftentimes the financial aid office and the admission office are two very separate offices that work at different timelines, and they work and potentially will send you materials at the same time, but they're doing different things at the same time. So you want to make sure that you are getting that information in a timely manner in both of those institutions. In terms of scholarships, particularly outside scholarships, right now there are still outside scholarships available for students. So I know that my students in the New England area, a lot of scholarships that were due March and April are now being pushed back for May, given kind of the current situation that we're in, because these are scholarships that are $1,000, $750. There's a $5,000 scholarship specific to the students in my town. So there could still be scholarships that students have available to them. I would suggest if you can go, you can look at your college or high school counseling office, your school counselor's office. They may have that information. You can also look at your town or city information. Sometimes if your family is in a union, the union website will have information about that. It's hard, I would say that this is, again, oftentimes people are looking for outside scholarships after the college application part of the process, because the application part takes a lot of time. And then sometimes you can reuse some of the information that you've used for college, then for the scholarship components and pieces in kind of March, April, and potentially in May to be looking for them. I would say, I think Chris said this, looking in your local area are the best times and timeline. I hope we gave a little bit of the timeline. For the most part, if you're getting a financial aid award from a college, it should come along the same time as your acceptance letter. And so if you've not received that yet, you should be able to receive that or go get that, because something must be missing if you haven't received it yet.
And for those of you who aren't seniors who are here and participating in this conversation, please know that you can be looking for outside scholarships now. I work at a school that's 5th through 12th grades, and as I look for scholarships for my students, I come across plenty of scholarships that are even for students who are in elementary and middle school. So just because you might be a sophomore or junior in high school doesn't mean that you can't be looking and applying for scholarships now.
I just wanted to throw out one more resource. All colleges, every single college has a thing called a net price calculator on their college financial aid website. So the net price calculator, you put in your family's information into the net price calculator, and it'll give you a sense of what that college anticipates your estimated family contribution will be. Different colleges have different methodologies. So what one school says you might be able to afford will look different than what another school says, even with the same information, just because of how they calculate things, which is confusing, and you're going to have to fill it out a lot. But I strongly recommend doing it, especially as you're looking at all these different schools, trying to get a sense of what your cost will be. A number of schools are also using a tool called My Intuition, which is about 3 minutes. It's a lot faster. It's a bit of a rough cut estimate, whereas the net price calculator is a little bit more in depth, but both are really great resources if you're trying to figure out where in the ballpark of the world are we even talking about here. So I very much recommend going onto institution-specific websites and filling those out.
Thank you all so much. And I know there's some great information shared about looking locally for scholarships. Especially for those of you who are high school counselors, Chris, Jamie, are there any good web-based resources where one can try to locate partial scholarships?
I know one of the resources that I like to use, and I feel is a pretty regularly updated and comprehensive website. There's one, I think it's jlvcollegecounseling.com. It's a really great website. There are scholarships listed from all over the country, and you can search by state, by academic major, whether you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. They even have scholarships and resources on there for current college students and even graduate students. Students who have special circumstances. You might be a first generation to college student. You might be a student of color. You might have a learning difference. So I think that's a wonderful website for students to be able to use of any age to start looking for outside scholarships.
I have to be honest, there's a couple, right? Like I would say niche or fast web, or they're pretty comprehensive, but I think sometimes they're a little challenging to be using. This is where I would really suggest kind of looking local and going to town websites or city websites and kind of starting there, because those are generally the scholarships that are least claimed and less competitive to receive. So, you know, when you get a $500 scholarship, those add up. And if you are applying for those, oftentimes there's 15 or 16 kids applying for those types of scholarships in your local area, as opposed, you know, it could be larger depending upon where you're living. West Hartford, Connecticut and DC look a little bit different in terms of their population. But I would say that it's a much better chance of winning that scholarship than applying for a scholarship that is publicized nationally and internationally.
Thank you so much. There was a question about the resource that Chris shared was JLV College Counseling. So JLV College Counseling. Another question has come in, and this is interesting. how common are full academic scholarships these days, merit-based aid that covers full cost? Would anybody like to answer that question?
I mean, I don't see them very often, quite honestly. And at the schools where I do see them, and by, I'm not sure if you mean by full academic scholarships, if you're talking about like a full tuition scholarship, which would still leave housing in your meal plan to cover, or if you're talking about a full ride scholarship, which would be inclusive of all of those things, the full cost of attendance. But there aren't very many of them out there. I'm sure that you know, or maybe have heard about some full tuition scholarships like the Posse Scholarship, for instance, depending on where you live. But there aren't that many, and typically the full tuition or full scholarships that colleges offer are really competitive. Oftentimes they're looking for students who have taken a rigorous course load, who have performed very well in their classes. If test scores are taken into consideration for that scholarship, they tend to look for some pretty high test scores as well. And because these are pretty substantial scholarships, there's usually an additional application or essay that you might have to write. There are a lot of colleges that would require an interview for a scholarship of that magnitude, but I don't see a lot of those these days.
Thank you, Chris. Another great question. A student who has submitted a financial aid appeal, should that student consider committing to a college before receiving that response? And in that window between submitting that appeal and waiting for a response, what kind of self-advocacy might be appropriate for a student in that, that kind of uncertain situation, waiting to make a commitment?
I would say that you should never commit to a college unless you are sure you can pay for it. And so if you have applied for a financial aid appeal, then there's a reason for that. And so I would be holding off for quote unquote committing to a college. At that point, I would say you should make sure you're communicating with the financial aid office of what your extension is. If it's so a lot of colleges have a May 1st kind of deposit date, but there are plenty that are going on to June 1st this year, and others that are a bit on a more rolling platform. So you can communicate that. So the first is to make sure that the financial aid office knows of your extension, or is communicating that extension with the admission office, and making sure everybody is communicating that. I would also say if you are talking with or thinking about 2 or 3 other colleges, communicate to those colleges that you are also waiting for a financial aid appeal from another institution, so that you are not pushed to kind of attend a college that you can't afford. I think there are lots of, kind of going back to that question, are there financial aid or the full tuition scholarships, full academic scholarships? The thing that I tell my students all the time is that finances, whether you have a lot of money or don't have a lot of money, should be the #1 priority in the college process. You should be able to afford it, right? And you should be able to like feel comfortable when you are there. That's a real, that is dependent upon the family. I would also say that you as the student are the kind of common denominator, right, of the institution, of whether you go to your local public institution, your community college, or a state institution, or a highly selective. Ultimately, you, the student, are the prize to be won, not the institution itself. And the kids for whom can be successful and oftentimes are persistent and graduating are oftentimes those kids who don't have to stress about the money as they are paying for their institution. And so that's a real issue. And so you want to make sure, just as much as you are checking out to make sure that they have an a cappella group or that you can do the work in the academics, that you can also pay for it, because that would be a lot of money that you would be putting in and then potentially flailing in the coming years.
I just want to reiterate the point that really please do communicate with us on the admission side of the house. Let us know, hey, I'm still waiting on a financial aid package or financial aid appeal. We will absolutely give you, or I cannot say all of us, broadly speaking, the vast majority of us will give you an extension until your financial aid package comes through, since we understand that that's such an integral part of this whole process.
Thank you so much. Would any of our panelists feel comfortable sharing if there are different common threads in the difference in financial aid between private universities and state universities?
Depends on the institution. So we'll say private institutions come in all sorts of flavors. You have for-profit institutions, not-for-profit institutions. You have schools that are full need. You have schools that don't package any loans into your financial aid package. And that's only in the private side. The public side also has, some have college programs where you go to community college in-state for 2 years and can then transfer to the 4-year, and that's typically a lot more affordable. Some programs have all 4 years can be free for all 4 years if you promise to stay in state and do some sort of public service work for an additional number of years. It really does depend on which state we're talking about and which private institutions we're talking about, which means a lot of effort on the student side, but hopefully you have a school counselor, you have the internet, which is some source of resource as well. But it really does depend on the institution and what they are able to offer. Chris and Jamie, I'm sure you guys have seen kind of all sides of these options.
Yeah, I mean, living in DC, we have one public institution, and so our students have the opportunity to take advantage of a tuition assistance grant, which helps to make up to $10,000 the difference between in and out-of-state tuition at public universities in other states. But the $10,000 most often doesn't make a huge dent because the difference between in and out-of-state tuition for our students is usually significantly more. And so a lot of times that ultimately can make private institutions, especially those that meet 100% of demonstrated need, more affordable than other public institutions for our kids. So as Yulia was saying, it really just depends, and using those net price calculators on colleges' websites can really be helpful in getting you a sense of what the cost of the college might be for your family if you were to choose to apply there and be accepted.
And I think reiterating that the colleges have different price tags, and ultimately, actually, particularly for different institutions, depending upon how much you and your family have assets and income, can impact how much you are going to pay for college. And so the price tag itself may not be is 9 times out of 10 not accurately representing how much college is going to be affordable for you. And so you, one friend down the street may be able to afford an institution and another may not, given the circumstances of kind of what goes on in their home. And so this is where these are very individualized experiences and where it can get very confusing. And so the price tag, what is put on a website of how much a college is likely not kind of your price tag. And you will likely not know that until you get accepted to the institution. Because that's the number one way that colleges are looking at financial aid, is based on how much your parents or your guardians make and how much they have in the bank.
Thank you all so much. And recognizing that I believe we have a 45-minute limit on this call, I wanted to add one additional excellent question that came in. If a student is offered a financial aid offer in freshman year, in the first year, how much reliance can a student have that their package will remain the same for each subsequent year?
I mean, provided that your family's circumstances, financial circumstances, don't change significantly from year to year, you can generally expect to get a pretty similar financial aid package. But if you win the lottery, someone gets a significant inheritance, or on the other end of that spectrum, if a parent loses a job or your home is foreclosed on, there are a variety of different things that can happen and swing the pendulum one way or the next. But provided that your family's situation is pretty steady throughout your time in college, then you can expect for the most part that your financial aid package would remain pretty similar as well. Again, I do want to reiterate though that if you are the recipient of a merit scholarship from that institution, there are usually strings attached in terms of you having to maintain a minimum GPA. And so while it's your parents' or guardian's job of making sure that you're applying for, or that they're applying for need-based aid, it's your job to make sure you're doing well in your classes so you can keep that merit scholarship.
And you should be asking that question, right? So your need-based financial aid will likely be similar year over year, but your merit scholarship, some of those colleges may give you a one-year scholarship. So you want to be able to ask that question. Is this something that I will, is that renewable each year, or is it just to get my foot in the door? You want to ask that question specifically if it's not cleared, very clearly stated on your financial aid award.
Thank you all so much. For those of you, we had a couple of questions that were very specific and really great questions. This session is being recorded, and my understanding is that our contact information, the contact information for all the presenters, is going to be available on that recording. So I hope that you all know that there are people who would really love to work with you through these questions. And from my end, thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Just a couple of reminders. As soon as you end this call ends, you'll get a window with 4 quick questions that you can answer real quick. Your feedback is really helpful. And if you go to strivescan.com/virtual, we have a ton more sessions that are being added through May 8th. So that's strivescan.com/virtual to sign up for all those sessions. I want to thank you so much to our panelists for sharing all their expert knowledge with us. And these recordings will be available, as Forbes mentioned. You will get an email for everyone who's registered with the link to view that recording as soon as it's available. Give us a couple of weeks to complete that. And once again, thank you to Accept and for our panelists for sharing all their information. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Be safe.
Bye all.